Tidbits. I'm looking forward to today's topic of change navigation. It's fascinating considering this was a topic that we had decided on earlier, and here we are in the land of change. A friend of mine, we were talking about some of the hot words that we keep hearing again and again: unprecedented times, time of uncertainty, and that is definitely true. And now that you've heard me say these words, you're going to hear them all day long, no doubt. They are true, though. We are in unprecedented times, and we are in a time of uncertainty. And isn't that what change is all about? So today, as we go through this topic, I would invite you just to take note of any thoughts and feelings that come to mind for you. So today, we're going to look at the different phases of change, what it means to guide our teams through each phase of change, and some change readiness characteristics. This information has been pulled from our half-day session on change navigation. We also call it leading through change, communicating change. There's a lot of different ways, angles we can take this. If we're looking at it from an essential skills, which that's what we love at WEM, our essential skills, we'd be looking at oral communication, working with others, as well as thinking skills. It takes a lot, all three of those things when we're leading through change. Now, consider these two questions to start, something I want you just kind of have rolling around in your mind. How does your organization prepare for change? And how do you, the leader, prepare for change? And are they different or are they the same? And how, here's a third one, it's not written down, how are we preparing our people for change? And perhaps that falls under how does our organization prepare for change? I have the pleasure of going to a lot of different types of workplaces. And as you've heard me say before, what's the common thread is people, right? What that would be the one thing we all have in common, whether we're building widgets, selling widgets, or servicing them, right? No matter what we're in, we're all going through change with people. And so how do we prepare for change? One company told me, we just know that it's always happening. Another one said, well, we rely on our policies and our practices. And how do we as leaders prepare for change? We look to the future, right? We're always looking to the future. What is causing all this change? There's a lot of different things, especially right now in our unprecedented, uncertain times, that is causing this change for us. And so here's the Serenity poem. Let me have the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know the difference. Now, many of us, when we're going through change, we can become frustrated. We're even paralyzed with fear. We're not sure how to move forward. And then there are some of us who are so excited that we hop into change without a thought, right? We're just kind of steamrolling through it. So the idea behind this is to have the wisdom to know the difference between the things we can change and the things we cannot. Many times people get stuck in trying to change the things they cannot change. And yes, there are some things that appear impossible to change that we can change, but a lot of the time there are things that we cannot change. Maybe it's things coming from corporate office. Maybe, it's personal things happening in someone's life that we have no control over that's causing change within our organization. Think of someone going on a medical leave and how that disrupts the team cohesiveness that we may have, right? And different roles and responsibilities are now shifted. So there are some things we can change and some things we cannot. The truth is that a company, and even individually, we will face internal and external pressures. As an organization evolves, there are things that happen that put pressure on it. So either way, these pressures make an organization stop and assess what is happening and make a choice about what to do. Now, we'll talk about a couple of different organizations that had some choices and ignored them, right, when it comes to change. And either way, like we said, these pressures will hopefully cause us to pause and think about what we're going to do and how we're going to move forward. If you consider this, what type of external pressures does your organization face, and what type of internal pressures do you face? External pressures right now would be government legislation. Right? We think of a lot of businesses that are no longer able to operate as they would, whether that's through a choice of deciding, you know what, this is unsafe for my workers, we are just closing shop for now, pressing the pause button. Or for some of us, we are now working more and more from home because of these external pressures. And some of us are still open for business, and because of legislation, we're deemed essential services. So now we have both an external pressure and an internal pressure. So those internal pressures are our people, internal policies, right? There's a difference between those pressures that are being put upon us and those that are coming from within. So if you think about yourself, what types of external pressures do you have, and what types of internal pressures do you have? Now, when a company is faced with these pressures, we have two choices. They're pretty simple. One, do nothing, right? And this is what it looks like, putting our blinders on. A company that does nothing will say things like, look how successful we have been. Why should we change when it's obvious what we have been doing is working for us? Now, I don't know about you, but the first one that comes to mind for me is Blockbuster Video. No offense. It's just an observation, right? Blockbuster Video, a couple of years ago, and then by a couple, I mean more than that, had the opportunity to work with this little company that was starting up called Netflix. Okay? And when they met, Blockbuster laughed at the idea. Who in the world would ever be a part of this sort of thing? And now we pause and think, okay, Blockbuster, what were you thinking, right? You had this opportunity to change, to do something more or something different, and they actually laughed Netflix out of the room. And, it's cheesy for me to say, but look who's laughing now, right? We don't see Blockbuster, but we sure do see Netflix, especially right now. It's like putting blinders on and saying that what's happening in the world and inside the organization is not going to have any impact on us. So what happens to organizations that put blinders on and do nothing is zero growth, right? Or a lack of growth, or maybe even being able to possibly hop out of business, right? And they're really faced with these types of pressures. Okay. The other thing that a company can do is change. Okay, change is hard, but necessary if we want to continue to grow and compete in today's market. Change often involves a loss, and all people will handle this loss differently. Now, I'm going to get personal with you. I think of my in-laws, okay? Granny and Grandpa. How they respond to change is quite different. My mother-in-law is very cautious. She approaches things and looks at things from many different angles. She likes to make sure that it's a sure thing. Grandpa, on the other hand, let her rip. Let's just see what happens, right? They're very, very different that way. And we will see that within an organization as well. People will respond very differently. Now, when the change is perceived as positive, it's a lot easier to accept the loss. See, we have this little guy saying, yay for change. So two choices, right? To do nothing or to change. Now, if there are any negative thoughts or perceptions about the loss, it can be difficult to get people to buy in, accept their losses, and move on. And especially when that change may be personnel, right? We're having to release people, we're making adjustments, maybe someone who wanted to move up or make a lateral move is no longer able to do that. Perhaps it's a raise that you were promised, but now in our uncertain and unprecedented times, that raise is no longer available. So lots of different ways that we can see the change. Some of us would say, well, thank goodness I still have a job. And others would be like really frustrated that they didn't get that raise. And maybe things are just on pause at this time. But like I said, it's a lot difficult for people to buy in and accept their losses and move on if there's any negative thoughts around change. And that's where it's so key to know your people and to be able to put the right people in the right places. Who do you want on your side, right? Do you want someone who's negative about the change or positive? The truth is we want both because they can help us to see things from different ways. Now, whether the loss is positive or negative, change has an impact on the growth curve, and we're going to talk about that curve right away. If we look at it this way, here's a beautiful little picture for you, the change curve, very much like grief, right? And we consider what we're going through right now as a world, it's a type of grief, and the same thing with our change. Change stage 1 at the top there, it says information. How do we feel? Most of us feel in denial. Well, it can't possibly be happening to me. I've heard of it happening to other people. So we receive the information and often we feel that sense of denial or shock. Stage 2, as we're offering support, the truth is our people are going to be frustrated. They're going to be angry. Now, if we pause here for just a minute in this lower part here of anger, you notice this wave with the arrow. So it curves up to denial, drops down to anger, and then moves up towards stage 4. This is our productivity. So when we receive the information, the shock, the denial, often our productivity dips and we get into the anger. Now, hopefully, by providing direction in stage 3 as a leader, our people will start to explore the change. Now, for some of us, maybe that was working from home, maybe it's having to wear personal protective equipment, whatever it is, right? We start to explore this new land, the new possibilities. And hopefully, as we continue to provide direction and encouragement, our people are brought to acceptance. Now, the truth is, each one of us could be moving along this change curve at different rates, right? We don't all run the race at the same pace. And so some folks may get lost in the anger or exploring and stay in this lower part of the dip instead of swirling their way all the way up through to acceptance. And the truth is, that's okay. What we want to do is help our people look to the future, to help moving forward. And like our title of this slide says, change is a matter of perspective. So hopefully we can get people like my father-in-law who see change as something exciting and something to be explored to help them bring the people who are stuck in anger, pull them up. Now, like I said, here's a close-up version, diminishing the dip, the productivity dip. So as we perhaps need to learn new jobs, a new way of doing things, a new technology, or otherwise adapt, there's usually that drop in productivity. It's not just attitude that drops, it's our actual technical abilities if we're having to make those types of changes. This is the short-term impact of change, but it's necessary if we're going to survive as an organization. So being able to provide that support isn't just, a pat on the back from 6 feet away or anything like that. It's also providing support for new technology, new ways of doing things, and possibly even new job description. Another way to look at this change curve is with the acronym SARA. So shock, like we said, that shock denial, anger, recognition. Well, things aren't really going to change, so this is where we get, stuck on recognition, which is to do nothing or to change, right? So those are where our two choices come in, acceptance and hope, right? Is it possible, it was my phrase 2 years ago, is it possible that, right? For example, this change could be positive. This will lead me to developing new skills. It's a great acronym to be used to define the stages of transition through change. Many of us have gone through this, and I think, as a vibe that I get when I'm out and about, which is, once a week, if that, is this idea of acceptance. And I don't know if you felt that as well, but having an acceptance will lead us to hope, and a hope of a brighter future, a hope of learning more, a hope of growth, which is essentially what comes through change. Now, as leaders, coaching through change can be very challenging. It can take a lot of patience. And part of that is recognizing, going back to a couple slides ago, recognizing that each one of our members will be at different phases during the change. So as we say here with patience and coaching, your teams and organization can come through changes and the growth will continue. The only thing we don't have here is the word time, right? So the time that it takes to help pull through people through the change, part of that time commitment is getting to know our people and to be able to approach them using the right communication style to help pull them up through this change. Now, if we're not sure of our people or we don't know how they learn, we need to know that. As a good coach, we definitely need to know our people so that we can bring them through this change successfully. And maybe it's pairing them up or buddying them with someone within the organization that is accepting of the change and is even hopeful for the outcome, and pairing them up with someone who is struggling, right? It does take patience and it will take coaching. Like I said, how do people feel during times of change? A lot of different feelings. I think of my own family going through the change. I was told by a certain 10-year-old girl that I was not her teacher and this is not school, and so I'm not doing it. Well, we both felt frustrated, I think, at that point, right? How do people feel during times of change? Afraid. They're fearful. They're scared. They're anxious. They're worried. They're excited. They're hopeful. They're curious, right? Not all people feel terrible during times of change. We need to acknowledge that people will have a myriad of feelings while going through change. Now, to continue with the change curve, we understand that it's a model used to recognize people's personal transitions through organizational change. So regardless of the time it takes, everyone will move through those stages. So even those folks that are excited about change, they still go through shock. They may even still go through anger, right? It's how we move through it and how quickly we can move through it. And as leaders, that's really key. If we ourselves are stuck in anger, in shock and denial, it's going to be really tricky to pull our people through. Your role as a leader is to help the people move through this change as quickly and as easily as possible. I'm a big believer in ease, and as a leader, we create ease by bringing information, by being transparent. Change is inevitable, growth is optional. Such a great phrase, because the change is always going to be happening. It's what we do with that is where we'll come out, right? So you need to understand that everyone deals with change differently, like we've said a million times. We can't force them through the change. We have to guide them. And I think this image tells the story perfectly. We can bring a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. So our role is to know that these dips will keep moving on. If we know that change is constant, it's kind of like the dishes. You finish washing the dishes and you turn around and there's a cup in the sink again. Where did it come from? It's just like change, right? We know that change is constant. If you look even at this cute little arrow, those dips, right? Those dips in productivity, those changes, it's constantly moving. So when we looked at our change curve picture, that is exactly a zoomed in picture of change. I invite you to think back to your very first day at your job and what sorts of changes you've seen since then. Perhaps it's personnel, policy, office location, someone got a different stapler, who knows, right? All these little changes, and they could even be big changes. Our role as leader is to recognize that these changes are constant. That people will say to me, I hate change. I don't like change. And yet, on our break, they're pulling out this device from their pocket and typing on glass to send an email or typing on glass to call home. It seems that some changes are perceived as good and some are perceived as bad. And so being aware of how we respond to change generally is really important. As leaders, what we need to do is to try to keep our employees off the bus to Pity City, and that's a quote from Jim Clemmer. He has some good ones. When people feel sorry for themselves, it's really challenging to pull them out of the change. Now, part of our half-day session on change readiness, change navigation, deals with these 7 traits of change readiness. We're going to go through each one at a high level and know that in our half-day session that we have an assessment with this as well. When we understand our own personality when faced with change, it will help us guard against stress, right, so that we can rely on our strengths. I preach that day in, day out. Let's build on our strengths and know what they are. So let's take a peek at all of these here. The first one is resourcefulness. Resourceful people make the most of any situation, utilizing whatever resources are available. I should have found a picture of MacGyver, right? To be able to pull from anything, seeing more than one way to achieve goals, and looking in less obvious places to find help. This quote here says, the biggest obstacles in our lives are the barriers our mind creates, and that couldn't be more true when it comes to change. When people are low in resourcefulness and counter obstacles, they often will get stuck and dig in their heels. Or they're just put the brakes on, right? They press pause. Those who are super high in resourcefulness, however, might overlook obvious solutions and create more work than is necessary. Again, it's a balance. And each one of these 7 traits, we'll talk about that balance, whether we're too low or too high or just right. Hashtag Goldilocks, right? Now, optimism. Optimism is huge when it comes to being able to change. An optimist is someone who figures that taking a step backward after taking a step forward is not a disaster. It's more like a cha-cha. Isn't that cute? The pessimist observes only problems and obstacles, while the optimist recognizes opportunities and possibilities. Optimists tend to be more enthusiastic and positive about change. Here's our however. Too much optimism may lack critical thinking skills. Busted. Okay. The third one here, adventurousness. The inclination to take risks and the desire to pursue the unknown, to walk the path less taken. Since change always involves both risk and the unknown, adventurous people usually perform well during organizational shakeups, right? They even may be excited about it. It's an adventure. Those with a lot of adventurousness may indicate a tendency towards recklessness. So when it comes to making choices, they may, just like it says, they may have a tendency towards recklessness, and that's not always a great thing when it comes to change. When we're helping people to explore and to move at their own pace, this could cause some feelings within an organization. Drive. So we look at drive this way. It combines the physical energy and the mental desire to create passion. It fuels all the other traits. So if you have drive, nothing appears impossible. And if you don't, change is downright exhausting. What about adaptability? We look at adaptability with a couple of other words, flexibility and resilience. Flexibility involves the ease of shifting expectations. Resilience is the capacity to rebound from adversity quickly with a minimum of trauma. So adaptability, being too adaptable, may indicate a lack of commitment or stick-to-itness. Now, confidence. Confidence is so important as a leader, and it needs to be genuine. All right, so if optimism is the view that a situation will work out, confidence is the belief in your own ability to handle it. And there's a direct correlation between levels of confidence and receptivity to change. And it's not just fake it till you make it. Like I said, it needs to be genuine. If people feel confident in their ability to handle a new task, they'll be more receptive and more positive. If your confidence, however, is spilling out, it may indicate a cocky know-it-all attitude and a lack of receptivity to feedback. Again, it's a balance. Tolerance for ambiguity. Think of gray areas, right? No matter how carefully you plan, there's always some element of indefiniteness. Too much tolerance can also get you into trouble in the sense that you may have difficulty finishing tasks and making decisions. I think of people who get really excited about things and they're great starters, ... but not always great at finishing. Now, there are different types of change, and it can mean something different depending on each of your organizations. So 4 different types of change. We look at operational changes, strategic changes, cultural changes, and political changes. And right now, as we live through COVID, we are in political changes. So those are the changes that are being put upon us through legislation. Now, one last thing I wanted to share with you here is the change and transition curve model, managing change in an organization. Now, letting go of what you're losing over there on the left. It might be a little bit fuzzy. Apologies for that. We look at all these different words. We said earlier, how do we feel when we're going through change? And the truth is, probably all of these, right? A lot of different feelings. The truth is that going from A to B straight across is not an option. We look at these different feelings of denial, anxiety, shock, resistance, fear, anger, frustration, confusion, and stress. The big thing as a leader is to recognize that our people are all going through these things all at different times. And so thinking about having to lead all of your people through all of these different feelings and situations and policy changes is challenging, right? There's a transition period. Try to manage the fear, begin to explore, try out new possibilities, and productivity impacted. I think if one of the greatest things we could bring to our people is kindness, openness, and trying to understand through empathy. So as we do that, this transition, they start to feel maybe even some skepticism, creativity, acceptance, that maybe possibly impatience, hope, energy, and enthusiasm. And like I said earlier, it's time. It's going to take time. And for each one of us, we will go through this in different ways. If there's one thing you could bring to your people, like I just said, is empathy. And empathy is feeling with people and trying to understand what they're going through. As we approach our new day, our new week with our Tuesday Tidbits, remember that the only thing constant in life is change. We see it day to day. We see different changing numbers. How long are we going to be stuck at home? Like, all of the news brings us so many different changes, and yet at the same time, it can feel like we're stuck in one change. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to the people that you work with, and know that each one of us will handle change in our own way. And as a leader, your opportunity is to be a change champion, to help pull your people out of the denial, the shock, and the anger, and bring them towards acceptance, hope, and enthusiasm. I hope everybody has a great day. If there were any questions, I will get to them. Go forth and beyond.